Good morning. George Hepworth, Grover Park Consulting. Building the Lander Trail Foundation online searchable database. Today, I want to look at another aspect of the publication and how we attacked a particular problem in managing the data required to adequately describe the book. I picked a book because it has two authors and it is currently assigned to two different categories. This is what we refer to in relational database design as a many-to-many relationship. In other words, many authors, in this case two is many, contributed to one publication, in this case across the wide and lonesome prairie. However, either or both of these authors could also be the author of a different publication. So one author can write many publications. I'm using a couple of terms here I might want to explain a little bit. I refer to publication because that includes things like books and DVDs and magazines. You'll see me switching back and forth between book and publication and magazine as the mood strikes, but they all mean the same thing within this context. We just have this broad category, publication. The same is true of categories. I go back and forth between genre, which is more of a literary term, and category, which is more of the research term. Back on track. When you have a situation where one author can contribute to many books, and one book can be written or co-written by many authors, this is what we call in database terms a many-to-many relationship. The same is true for categories. One book can fall into multiple categories, in this case both Lander Trail and Oregon Trail, and perhaps even other categories that we might want to search on. At the same time, many books fall into the category of Oregon Trail. Many books fall under the category of Lander Trail. So again, many categories to many books. Let's look at how we handle that in the database. This is the relationship diagram for the 5 tables involved in these two many-to-many relationships. Those of you who are coming to this from the Access world will immediately recognize the concept of a junction table. But for those of you who are coming from a different background, maybe we should invest a few minutes here in explaining what we mean by a junction table and how it works. As I just got through saying, one creator or one author can contribute to many books, and each book can have one or more authors associated with it. And the same is true for genres or categories. To correctly and adequately model this in a relational database, we need to include the primary key from one table and the primary key from the other table in a single record in a junction table. The same is true for genre or category. Each publication can be combined with one or more genres, and each genre can be combined in a single record with one publication, multiple records for multiple publications. Primary key, foreign key. Primary key, foreign key. Primary key, foreign key, primary key, foreign key. That's how this is intended to work. How does that show up in the interface? It shows up here and here. These are actually galleries, and because they are embedded within another gallery, I think of them as sub-galleries. We talk about embedded galleries, but it's the same concept you would see in an Access form. Main form with two embedded subforms. Let's look at the mechanism that makes this possible. It's time to leave the runtime and revert back to our editing environment. we're looking at the publications screen, the publications gallery, and I talked about that in part 2 and how we get the items into this gallery. You can see the outline here. Within this gallery, we have 2 sub-galleries or embedded galleries. Actually 3, but the 2 that I want are this no longer owned. I will talk about that later on in a different video. The 2 we're concerned about now are the publication to authors and the publication to assigned categories. These are the sub-galleries where we handle this many-to-many relationship. They're identical except for the content. They're constructed exactly the same way, so I don't really need to explain both of them. I can show you just the authors, and you can figure out that how the galleries works in the same way. This gallery has one control on it, that control being the name of the author. This item in the PowerApps syntax is very similar to the concept of the current record in the Access environment. So when we say this item.author, we're saying show me the author field from the current record. So how do we get that? Let's look at the items. The items, again, is the record source which populates this sub-gallery. How do we get there? Well, the outer function here is simply the sorting. We're going to sort alphabetically on author. We're filtering a collection called Publications with Authors using the publication ID from this collection that matches the current record or this item's publication ID. So whatever the publication ID is in this gallery, this sub-gallery will show only records in this collection which match on publication ID. This is very much like the master-child linking fields in a main form subform. But that then brings up the question, where do we get this publication, or this collection? A collection, as I've said in previous videos, is an in-memory temporary table. It's usually created by filtering records from a different source to bring in only those records which we need or want for a particular purpose. But because it's in memory and resident in memory, it's generally faster than going back directly to the data source to bring it back. So let's look at how we create this collection and what's in it. First, we have to find the place in the application where I created the collection, the Publications with Authors collection, and populated it with records. We have a very straightforward way to do that. In PowerApps, on the toolbar here on the left, we have a search function. So I'm going to copy the term, select search, paste it into the search box, and it's going to show me everywhere within the entire application this collection appears. I'll skip the first part. It's a collection in the data. The first place it occurs is in the onStart action for the entire app. As I have said in previous videos for other PowerApps applications, onStart fills the same role in this environment that the AutoExec macro fills in an ACCDB Access application. You can think of the onStart action in the same way you think of an AutoExec macro. This is where you instantiate variables, set up your environment the way you want it to work, and so on. Here, the first step is to create the Publication with Authors collection and populate it with records. Looking ahead, you can see this is the screen where we use it, the publication screen, in the Publications gallery, in the sub-gallery called Publication Authors. It provides items. So this structure tells me where and how this particular search term is used. This tells me where it's created. And as you can see, there are 2 other screens where that same collection is either rebuilt or used. I'm going to focus on the OnStart because that's where we need to figure out how this publications with authors collection was created. Click it. It takes me directly to the OnStart action. This is a little more complicated than some things we've looked at in the first couple of videos, so I'm going to take a little more time to dive into it deeply. I think by the time we get through this, we will have exhausted our time for this particular video. The clear action tells me whatever is in there now, get rid of it. Technically, if it's the OnStart action and we're loading the app for the first time, there should be no records, there should be no collection, and there should be nothing to clear. However, I have found that in the course of working with the application, sometimes I want to reinitialize, I want to run the OnStart action a second or a third time to kind of reset everything back to the initial state. I have two helper collections. One is the recursion count and the other is the iteration spans. I clear both of those so everything is back to its initial empty state. I set the record limit to 2000. If you remember in prior video, I mentioned the 2000 row limit to work with delegable functions. So I want to bring this back in record chunks of no more than 2000 to ensure that I stay under that delegable limit. You can look at part 2 of this video series, or you can look at other videos on YouTube that explain in more detail the delegation limit and how that impacts what you can do with PowerApps. The next thing we do is we create a variable called last record, and it looks at a view in SQL Server. I'll come back to this. We sort that view by publication ID in descending order, and then we take the first record off of that list. That should give me the largest or the greatest publication ID in this view. So that tells me once I hit that record ID, that publication ID, I will have gone through the entire record set. The next step is to create the number of iterations I need in 2000 record chunks to bring in all of the records from this underlying view. We divide the largest number here by the 2000 and add 1, and that tells me how many times I have to loop through this view to get all of the records, one record at a time. Then I set the max event count to the last record publication ID, which is what we collected up here, and add 1. That ensures that when I get through my count, I'm 1 past the end of the record set, so now I know that I've got them all. Next step, lost track where I was. Okay, I bring in a second helper collection. This is based on a tally table. It's nothing more than a list of numbers 1 through 2000 or 1 through 100 or whatever the largest number of records you are going to have, so that I can ensure that I'm going to hit each one of the records in turn, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we iterate. The for all is the method we use in PowerApps to iterate over a record set. Our helper collections are all set up and we're ready to begin the process of bringing in records from our underlying record set. This collection, called iteration spans, tells me the first and last publication ID to bring in each of my 3 iterations. Keep in mind that this publication ID, which is 2022, is the publication ID of the last record entered into the table. That doesn't mean that there are 2022 records, because in these spans, records could have been added and deleted. so that the actual total number of records is smaller than the largest of the publication IDs. But by doing the math this way, we ensure that we run 3 more or less equal iterations, each of which is smaller than our delegation limit. First item and last item, as reflected here. The final step, which is collecting all of our underlying records from our record source, which is this view, into this collection, is to bring them in. Every record that falls between this publication ID and this publication ID, we collect it. We run again a second time, bring in everything from this ID to this ID, a third time, everything from this ID to that ID. Because my current record source is less than 2,000 records, this is really unnecessary. I'm going to stay within my delegation limit anyway. But this allows for growth of the number of records in the table to greatly exceed, potentially tens of thousands of records in the underlying record source can be brought in using this method that iterates through that entire record source, bringing in chunks of records that are within my delegation limit. At this point, we have covered pretty much everything I have time for in this session. I'll wrap it up. I'll come back in the next part and we'll take a closer look at the view in SQL Server, see how that's set up to allow us to bring in just the values we need to support our 2 sub-galleries. If you like what you see, please hit the like button. If you want to see more, please hit the subscribe button. If you want to be notified when the next video is available, hit the notify button. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.